Alright, well, welcome back, whoever watches this. I just sort of wanted to make another video about anyone who wants to get into small engine repair and sort of some places to start and how you can build on your business and whatnot. And so basically, we'll get started with sort of the common mowers that you're going to get if you're going to do small engine repair. So pretty much like 90% of the mowers I get are Briggs & Stratton engines, and it's if you see that Lowe's Advantage sticker, you know that it's going to be a hell of a time trying to find parts for this stuff and whatnot. And basically, if you're going to do small engine repair, it's a good place to get started with is understanding how the mower, well, basically how an engine runs, how these engines work. Pretty much all of them work about the exact same, and you're going to need a basic on electrical, drivetrain, and blades. So I guess we'll get started with the simplest, well, not the simplest, but the engine basically. So with these engines, you're obviously going to always want to check your fluids first. You're going to have a gas tank usually here, or there'll be one mounted back here underneath, and usually the gas cap will be here on the side, under the seat, sticking out the back, doesn't matter. And so obviously, you're going to want to check your oil level. Pretty much every mower is going to use SAE 30 or 10W 30. They're pretty much all the same. And never put E85 in any of your gas tanks ever, for any riding mower ever. Tell all your customers that. It has to be 87 or better. Otherwise, you're going to destroy your carburetor. And so that's sort of what you're going to want to first check when you're working on a riding mower with an engine problem. And sort of the second step is usually the other easy somewhat step, is to make sure you check your air filter. I've already replaced the air filter in this one, and you're obviously going to want to make sure it's clean. If it's not clean, the engine can't get enough air to breathe and start. And so then you're going to obviously have a fuel filter or a fuel shutoff. I usually put fuel shutoffs on for my customers so that way they can run their carburetor out of fuel at the end of the year, so that way it doesn't destroy the engine. But, customer has to request it and be willing to pay for it. And so you're going to have your fuel come from your fuel tank, and on the models where the fuel tank's in the back, you'll usually have a little fuel pump that's activated by vacuum pressure. I actually have one over here. It's on this 0 turn that I just picked up for a customer. And if you're going to do small engine repair, odds are you're probably not going to run into too many 0 turns. But yeah, that's a fuel pump. You notice it's just like about all the others. And the one that's on the top is your vacuum line. The one that's on the side with your vacuum, that's going to be your intake per se, or inlet for fuel. And then the line on the bottom goes to your carburetor, somewhat similar. And some engines are going to have oil filters, some engines won't. And you can see like this one's obviously got the same thing on it. But, you can't really say engines with fuel pumps are bad, engines without fuel pumps are bad. They're usually about the same. It doesn't matter too much, and usually you'll know a fuel pump's bad when it'll start blowing junk out of that little screen on the side of them. So then it makes your way to your carburetor, and you'll notice the all too familiar name if you're a small engine mechanic, the Nicky 6 carburetors. These Nicky carburetors are complete garbage. It should be like literally illegal to put them on mowers. You'll notice I've already replaced this Nicky carb with a Walbro. I've actually got a Walbro already replaced on this one over here. You'll notice the Walbro has the solenoid on the bottom there. It looks a little bit different, and the fuel line comes straight out to the side, which actually, makes sense. Took all of about 3 seconds to realize that, maybe we should bend the fuel line so it doesn't kink up like this one. It takes like 3 seconds, but, that would require them to actually think. And if you're an engineer that thinks and uses their head, then you're a terrible engineer in these days. And so usually on riding mowers and bigger, you'll have what's called an anti-backfire solenoid, fuel shutoff solenoid. Sort of same thing. Basically, all it is a one wire here. Runs power through the solenoid and ground to the other side. And then it'll pull a little plunger down on the inside. You can unscrew this with a 1/2-inch wrench. It might have to be a slim one, so you might have to grind it down. Take this off. It's just basically a nut. Well, it's basically a screw that goes into the bowl. And then you can see when you turn your key. I don't even think the key is in this one. But you'll hear and see when you turn your key. You'll hear that nice little click. And that click means that it is working. And basically all it does is just shut off fuel to your engine. So that way it does not have the chance to backfire when it's shutting down. And if you want to just completely eliminate those, you can just snip the top off of them if they stop working. Or you can pay the unusual amount of money for these. It's like $100, I think, last time I checked. And then, you know, that's how the fuel gets mixed with the air in what's called a Venturi tube that's built into the carburetor. Because you'll notice, this is the inlet side of the air. That's your choke. Oop. If you look down in there, it actually gets smaller as it goes in there and compresses it somewhat. And that's called a Venturi tube. And on these ones, you'll have like a couple adjustments you can do for your fuel-air ratio and your throttle here. You can adjust your idle. And, you know, your choke. You got to make sure that your choke moves. So you can see on these models that there is this little lever here. If you look over the choke, oh, my bad. If you look over here, you'll notice that when you throttle up and you get to the choke position, there you go. You can see it pushes on that lever. Then as it comes back, it lets the choke off, and that's how you control your throttle. And your throttle is not directly controlled up there. It controls the amount of tension that's placed on this little governor arm, which goes straight to your throttle over there. And when the, we'll get to that part a little bit later, but there's a pretty common issue on these Intex about their throttles. So then you've got your mixture going in through your valves into your combustion chamber. And as this spins around, that's what makes it a 4-stroke engine. Is basically it has one stroke that draws in that air-fuel ratio coming from your carburetor. And then you have another stroke that compresses it. And then you have your spark plug down there that will fire. And then you'll have a, well, that's still part of the same stroke somewhat. The power stroke, basically. And then you'll have the exhaust stroke, which will then, you know, go out your muffler. And that's basically how an engine will run. Now there are 5 main, well, there's 5 main parts, but you can really combine it down to like 3 or however you want it. And you're going to need your air and fuel. You're going to need spark. You're going to need timing, which usually isn't an issue. And you're going to need compression. If you are missing any one of those things, your engine will not run. So how can you eliminate that? If it's an engine issue, obviously, engine not running or whatever. And obviously, your engine has to be spinning in order for this to actually apply. Because if it's not spinning, it obviously isn't doing anything. So what you can do is you can take off your air filter cover, and then you can remove your air filter, and you want to spray starting fluid in here and turn over your engine. If you do that, and it starts and runs for a little bit, then you know you've got spark, because obviously how else is that fuel going to ignite? You've got compression, because how else is that fuel going to get compressed? And then you've also got timing, if it doesn't sound terrible. And then you've pretty much got everything you need besides fuel, because you added the fuel and separated all the other parts. And then you know you need to go somewhere in the carburetor, somewhere between the fuel tank and the carburetor. You're not getting fuel into that air-fuel mixture that goes in through the intake. And if it doesn't start, then usually it's going to be a spark plug issue. So you're going to want to take your spark plug out and then, you know, clean it, replace it, or whatever. and you can hold it on the muffler and spin the engine over, and you should be able to see spark happening. If you can't see spark, replace the spark plug. If you use the spark plug, well, if you replace the spark plug and it doesn't fix the issue, it could be the ignition coil. Or if it's a Kohler engine, it's probably your CDI module, MDI module. But if that's a little bit more advanced, we'll stick with the basics. And then you can replace your ignition coil. And basically all you need is a business card or a 10,000ths feeler gauge. Stick it in there, and you spin your flywheel over by hand, and you set that new ignition coil up against it, so that way it's got that gap, and then you tighten down the 2 bolts that hold it together. And don't forget to reconnect your ground wire, because if you don't have a ground wire, then there's nothing going to be telling the engine to shut off, in which case you'll have to use a screwdriver to pop off the spark plug wire in order to get it to shut off, or stick a piece of cardboard or whatever over the air filter. And so I guess we'll move on to, well, the other issues it could be is a lot of times on these Briggs & Stratton engines or the Kohler Courage twins, the valves will come out of adjustment and it'll crank super hard. It'll go and it just doesn't want to crank. And basically you're going to have to open up that valve cover in the front, the 3 3/8 head bolts, well, 4 3/8 head bolts over there, and then you're going to have to adjust the valves. And that's a little bit of a, we'll make another video on that later on maybe, and then you can fix that. And if that doesn't work, then you know that it's going to be the compression release that's on the inside of these engines. And what that compression release does is it holds the exhaust valve open, so that way it's a little less compression, so that way your engine can spin a lot easier and start. And that's basically how these engines work, and that's going to be pretty much all of your issues that you'll run into on these engines. Okay, so I guess we'll move over to the electrical of a riding mower. Now generally on a riding mower, you're going to have a battery in the back, or if you got a fuel tank in the back, the battery's usually right here. And if it's just a little single cylinder engine, usually a 250 or 230 cc battery, CCA battery, cold cranking amp battery, is just plenty for a single cylinder. If you got a twin, then I'd recommend getting a 350. And so everything that's going to be on the back of a riding mower that will matter almost entirely on your battery. If your battery is, if your battery is dead, less than 12 volts basically, you probably have to throw it on a trickle charger and get it to go again. And, you know, always make sure you've got a good charged battery before you do electrical diagnosis. And if you're going to go farther than the battery, I usually recommend taking off the battery, so that way there's no chance you shock yourself. And it's DC, so it'll make your hair stand up, but it's the AC stuff that'll really kill you. And that only comes off the alternator, so you don't have to worry too much. And so basically, you've got your power that runs all the way, well, so on this model, you're going to have a starter solenoid, and it's usually just right on the inside of the battery compartment, so can't really see that. But, you know, I do have one out over here. If you follow me into the great unknown. You'll have a starter solenoid. And so this one's a little 3-post one, but the 4-post ones operate the same as the 3-post. It's just that the 3-post grounds through the frame that it's mounted to. So basically your positive battery lead comes right to here. Your negative is going to go to a ground, usually next to the battery. And all this thing does is when you take that key and you flick it over all the way, it's going to send power here. It's barely any power, and then it's going to force a massive piece, you know, some sort of, you know, piece of copper in there basically. It connects these 2 posts together. And well, you're thinking, well, why don't I just connect it myself? Well, the problem is that makes a whole bunch of sparks and can sometimes blow up these little solenoids. So if you're doing electrical diagnosis, I wouldn't recommend doing that too often. But if you're in a pinch and you need to get your riding mower out, you can start it that way. Just take a wrench or a screwdriver and just connect these 2 posts. And that'll work on some older cars as well. But there's safeties on riding mowers, and we'll get into that in a bit. But basically this goes all the way to the starter on the other side of the engine, which I've got this one hooked up for a new starter solenoid, but you get the point. And sometimes these starter solenoids are built onto the starters, and they'll look like another little baby starter on the starter. Same principle. And if you want to jump your starter that are like those, basically they call them excite wires. You just run power from, you know, your first post down to your excite wire, and that'll force the solenoid up, and boom, away she goes. So now then, on to what safeties there are on mowers and how to troubleshoot them. Well, if you want to see if you got a bad starter or not, and you've got yourself a good battery already, you can just connect these 2 posts just one time and see if it sends power and if your starter does anything. But for safeties that matter the most, in order to start almost every single riding mower ever, your blades have to be disengaged, and there's usually a little switch. I think this one's got it just nice up and easy to access. Basically, every single safety switch is this exact same switch on a riding mower. All the switches are just a little plunger that when you sit on your riding mower, you'll press down on it. When your blades are pulled all the way back, then it compresses that. Or when your clutch is all the way down, it pushes on that switch. And what all those switches do is on one set of the terminals, there are 4 posts on them, one set is going to have no power, and then it's going to close when you press that switch down, normally open, and when it closes it, then it sends power through. And the other side is going to have power, and it's going to be a normally closed switch. And then when you open it, there's going to be no power, it's going to disappear. Or, yeah, it has power when it's not connected. So, if you want to bypass any of your safety switches that are built in on your mower, obviously, with your switches, you can just cover them with tape. Or if you want to do a nice, neat wiring job, you just connect one of the wires, and then you just cut out the other 2. And generally, you'll have to use a power probe or a multimeter or whatever to figure out which one's which. And basically, you just need to make sure that your clutch safety works, your seat safety works, and your blade safety works. And you might be asking, well, what about, the pull button style ones? Basically, on those pull button styles, electric PTOs, if you take them out of their little hat, out of their wherever they are on the dash or side or whatever, it's usually just 2 tabs, and you push it up through. Same with the key switches. Usually, sometimes they're a screw. And basically, all they have, they're going to have 1 row, 2 row, and 3 row of, contacts. And basically, when it's in the pushed down position, your outside row, right? Yeah, your outside row or your insides, or your inside with an outside should be connected. And when you pull that switch out, it connects a different row. If it's not doing that with all 3, and there'll usually be one missing one, and that's usually just your ground, so you don't have to worry about that. And if it isn't working on all 3 of them, and if you give it a little wiggle or a jostle, and you'll notice it's kind of finicky, replace the switch. And that's how you know that mower switch is bad. And generally, if one of these safety switches goes bad, it's pretty actually rare for a safety switch to go bad. It's not a frequent issue. Usually it's like the seat switch, it's not plugged in right, it's a little bit corroded, you just need to clean it up. Usually I'll just remove the safety entirely. You're like, well, what if I just don't even want to deal with any of these safeties anyway? Well, you're going to have to rewire it because all these switches are wired to go through the safeties, the key switches. Which, it's annoying, but they're pretty simple wiring. A lot of other guys have done videos on that. And that's basically all the wiring that's on the body of a mower. And you can obviously go up and underneath into your key switch. I don't think I have one out right now, unfortunately. But basically, on the back of your key switch, you're going to see like G, L, A1, A2, M, and S. And basically what you can do to test your key switch, which is a pretty common failure point on like the Husqvarna ones, is you basically take your key and you move it to the different positions, and you have your multimeter go between ground and or your you know, test light, doesn't matter, and you have them go between your ground wire and or any ground, and you go between ground and battery, and that'll test whether or not you have, you know, battery power to your switch. And that one will be on as soon as you turn the key on. I don't think any of them should have power while the key is in the OFF mode, except maybe battery, but they're all wired differently, even though they look the same or have the same number of pins. So you'll have to definitely reference your wiring diagram. And basically you just go between ground and lights, ground and starter, ground and M for magneto, which is how it kills the power to the engine. And you'll just have to test to make sure that it is actually sending power to each of those when you turn your key. And you obviously will also have to make sure that it actually makes it to the engine. And every engine is going to have a wiring harness like this. Some are just little black 4 pins. There's a million different variations, but all of the engines connect differently. Well, you know, they all connect at some point to the rest of the mower. And generally, on a mower, you're going to have 2 wires coming from underneath the flywheel. That's going to be your alternator and your kill switch for your magneto to turn the spark off. And you'll notice one of these wires is unusually thick. And that's because right there is a diode. A diode will prevent the AC power that comes from your alternator, stator, generator. And there's a million names. They all perform the same task. They produce power. And basically that diode is going to prevent the backflow of power to your alternator, which will fry it. So do not put power that way. And that will also convert it from AC power to DC power, if I have that right. I may have that wrong. Feel free to in the comments to tell me if I'm wrong, because that helps out other people. So proving me wrong helps out other people, whether you like it or not. And basically, replacing an alternator on these is actually super easy if you've got the tools. But, you know, that's for another video. We're just covering basics and simple parts of it. And then you'll have another 2 wires, and we'll just go to the other side. And that'll go to your fuel shutoff solenoid on your carburetor. 2 wires. You know, one of them will be a ground, and the other one will be sending power when you turn the key to the on position, and it'll also have it when you have the start position, but that's not, you know, this basically just allows the flow of fuel into the engine. And, you know, if these don't work, you can just nip them off. Problem solved. You don't have to replace them. They're kind of expensive, but yep, that's pretty much about it for wiring. And then, you know, headlights, all a light is just a resistor. So as long as you have power flowing through, then you will have lights. And that's why there's 2, power and ground. And, you know, these, you know, almost all the time they're broken, and you might just have to rewire them and whatnot. And that'll be your other 2-pin connector that is just dangling right now. But that's basically all of the wiring on a riding mower. And so I guess we'll move on to transmissions. And, well, I guess the drivetrain. So normally on the bottom side of these things, if you have a complaint that the mower is, well, your mower isn't driving forward, usually you'll be able to tell because if there's the belt's off, because you can just look underneath your battery, if it's a battery in the back, and you'll be able to see whether or not it's actually driving anything. And pretty much if it's driving the pulley on the top, then yeah, and usually it's a dead transmission at that point. But, you know, there's a few other things you can certainly try, like, you know, your adjuster spring maybe not there and it may not actually be shifting. Usually I like to avoid transmission issues. They can be a real pain to deal with sometimes. So you know, if you want to tackle the hassle of going through them, then, you know, that's all for you, you know. So I guess we'll start off next with our blades and how they engage. And so basically you'll have a manual, or you'll have a little electric PTO switch that just connects contacts, or you'll have a cable driven lever. And that will come down here usually, and I'll move this lever, or a cable on like the back of these decks, and that'll pull a belt tight, or you'll have an electric PTO clutch on the bottom of your engine. And when that has power applied, it's just a little electromagnet, and then it closes so that way your belt starts spinning. And, you know, people are always worried, well, you know, maybe it's not engaging it slow enough, or, you know, but trust me, that PTO clutch works just fine as long as it turns on and off. And as long as you can hear those clicks, then it's good. I've actually got a deck off over here, so we can sort of show you how these things work. So basically, on the underneath of your tractor, you've got your engine pulley up here. Then your belt comes around. Usually there'll be one or two idlers in this case. And then it'll go around a deck spindle here and a deck spindle there. And those will be what drives your blades. And whenever you press or pull on your engagement, that will move your brake arms, apply brake pressure to your spindles. This brake pad is completely gone, but, you know, customer requests whatever the customer requests. And another brake arm. This one's spring's broken, but that's okay. And then it will move one of your idlers. Ooh, feisty. It'll move it over so that way it tensions up the belt so the blades start to spin. And usually, like in the case of LT2000s, 1000s, there'll be the spring goes over this top post here, and you stick a washer on top and a cotter pin so that way it'll connect, and then it comes back to here. And then once you get that on or off, then you can bring it back here, take out the cotter pin, and then pull it back, and then just take it off. And that's basically how the blade engagement works on all of them. And in the case of removing belts, usually what you're going to have to do is on manual engagement ones, while it's disengaged, slip the belt off the front. It's going to take a little bit of force and wiggle in, so you might have to spin it and slowly work it off. And then you're going to actually want to engage the blades. No running, engine not running, nothing running. And then you're just going to want to slip them all off, because, so, you know, you'll be fighting the brake pads to come off and whatnot, and sometimes they have the covers on them. You know, it's just easier that way. And then you've got your little tabs here, your keepers. And then you can slowly slip your belt off. And it just makes it easier. And that's basically how the belts and the blades work. And if you want to, you know, remove your deck to make it easier, that certainly makes it a lot easier to, you know, get stuff done on them. And, you know, you've got your anti-scalping wheels and your flap. And that's just other parts that don't really do anything. And generally, on the back of a deck or the front of a deck, there will be these stabilizer arms, just so that way your deck doesn't, you know, shake this way too much as it, you know, this way. And then usually you'll have a set of arms to hold your deck up, so that way when you lift up with your deck height adjustment, it'll go up and down. And for LT1000, 2000s, that's these two arms. And all they are on the underneath, if you want to remove your deck, just set it all the way in the lowest position. There'll be a cotter pin here, and on the end of your adjustment arm, and the two arms in the front. You pull all those cotter pins out, and then you might have to pick up on the deck. You'll usually have to pick up on the deck a little bit with one arm, and then shimmy the arms off or whatever, and then you'll be able to remove the whole deck. And usually I like to just pull them out to the side. It's going to be loud because obviously you're scraping metal across the ground. So, but there's really not really an easier way to do it. Most of them are pretty simple. And that's basically how a deck works on most of these ones. A lot of times on like the Husqvarna ones and John Deere ones, they'll have 2 arms at the back with their height adjustments a little bit different, but generally they all work somewhat the same. You know, these MTD ones are cable driven, so, you know, it's just a little cable attached to this that goes all the way down and picks up and down on a spring that picks up your mower deck. And, you know, basically just follow it along, and you got to make sure it's all connected. If it's, you know, hanged up anywhere, then it's not going to come off. And, well, that's sort of really just the basics of a riding mower, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and just sort of comment on anything that you think I missed, or if you have any questions about your riding mower. I'll certainly, you know, do my best to help you out. And yeah, I think that about all covers it. Thank you for watching, and have a great day. Signing off.